Welcome to PsiChat. My name's Dave, and I'm here with my co-host and wife, Jen. How you doing?
I'm good, Dave. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So this week's topic is parapsychology.
Oh, that's an excellent topic. There's not a lot of people who really truly understand what parapsychology is. How about you give us a explanation or even a definition first off, and then maybe get into it a little bit more.
Sure. Parapsychology, according to the Parapsychological Association, they came up with this definition and published it in 1989. And it's the apparent anomalies of behavior and experience that exist apart from current known explanatory mechanisms that account for organism environment and organism information flow.
Wow.
That's a mouthful.
That is quite the explanation.
Yeah, it's a long definition. It really is. So parapsychologists, they really try to understand the basis for human experience. Why do they have these experiences? Why do you think you saw a ghost? Or why do you think you're in a haunted house? Why do you think you had a near-death experience? Why do you think you had a telepathic occurrence with somebody? How did you know who was calling you before your phone actually rang?
I know a lot of people who've had these experiences and they can't explain them. So this is good. I like this topic.
Yeah, and there's no doubt the experiences actually occur.
Right.
No doubt. But actually, what is the process? And if there is a paranormal process, which is just a hypothesis, there's a lot of different ones, but what that process is, we're not really sure. But they do center on people's experiences, and they do have them. So there's no doubt that people have experiences. It's just what's going on and what's happening.
Right.
So it covers a couple different things. Extrasensory perception, or what some people call extended sensory perception, or what more mainstream people are now calling anomalous cognition. Mm-hmm. So it's really acquiring information without any human senses or logical inference. Okay. And there's a couple different areas, telepathy, which is mind-to-mind communication, clairvoyance, which is acquiring information about something at a distance or that you don't have normal sensory input to, or you can't get at logically by inferring. Precognition, kind of telling the future, predicting the future, and then retrocognition is getting information about something that happened in the past. So that's one of the three areas of parapsychology.
Okay.
So the second area is the mind over matter, which in the definition we talk about organism environment, not just information flow, that's the ESP part, but the ability to affect the environment or affect physical objects, or actually to affect other living beings as well, such as direct mental interaction at a distance. So PK overall, it's mind over matter. We've all heard of it. We've seen the movie Carrie. Mm-hmm. That was to the extreme, and that would actually be an example of macro psychokinesis. So macro is on the larger scale. Uri Geller, if he bends spoons, which that might be a topic later on, if he actually could bend spoons or not, or if it was actually just a parlor trick, which it could be. But macro PK is something you can see.
Right.
It's visual. You don't need any special equipment. You don't need statistics. You don't need fine measurements.
Okay.
The other side of that is micro. Yep. And we've done some work with micro psychokinesis. It can be anything that you need special instrumentation to see the effect, to see the mind over matter effect, or you have to run some advanced statistics to see the effect. And you and I have published some papers on recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, poltergeist agents having a micro psychokinetic effect potentially on a random number generator.
Okay, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. So we know what PK is. What is RSPK? Recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis.
Right. That is what people used to call, or actually that's the parapsychological term, and what they call poltergeists. So they think poltergeists are due to a living human agent that is somehow releasing some sort of subconscious stress, and they're not doing it in the normal way. So the idea is they're affecting the environment. And some of the key characteristics is it's surrounding a living agent. It is area focused or subject focused. So, for example, if the stress that's being caused is by, let's say, a family member, and you're suppressing it, you go to your house, and all of a sudden a picture with that family member flies off the shelf and breaks. That could be an idea of object focus PK with RSPK.
Okay.
And typically it doesn't last very long, couple weeks maybe at most. And typically once you realize you're doing it, or you get some sort of help to alleviate the stress, to release it in normal ways, it goes away pretty quick. But that's an area that's under PK in parapsychology as well.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Thank you.
And then the one that we're very close to, that we spent a lot of time on, is survival.
And it's not probably what you think. It's not the
Naked and Afraid survival?
No.
No? Survivor?
No.
No?
No.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Okay, let's
Getting close.
I'll give it a better try here. It's really basically that there's some element of human existence that survives death. So once you pass away, there's some part of you that survives.
Okay. A lot of people like to know that.
Yep.
And a lot of people believe that that's true. So
Yep.
it's nice that it's a scientific theory.
Hypothesis, more or less. But
Hypothesis,
same.
okay.
Yeah, some people have taken it to a theory.
Okay.
And there's a couple different areas. We're all familiar with ghosts and hauntings, and that's a lot of where we got our start in parapsychology and paranormal, is looking at ghosts and hauntings. But it's a little more than that. They actually differentiate. You have hauntings, of course, which are things that tend to occur and reoccur at a certain location.
Right.
Residual hauntings, place memories, not so sure that's survival related.
Okay.
There's a lot of question there, and that's another good topic for a future show maybe. But apparitions, intelligent ones that seem to interact and provide what they call veridical or verifiable information, where you don't know it at the time, but you can verify it at some point. So whatever that intelligence is, it interacts with you. Yeah.
So I know that we have been trying for a while to get that connection between ghosts and the afterlife and that type of thing going.
Right.
Is this something that's part of that?
Yes, survival related again is potentially some element of human existence that survives bodily death. So life after death, not necessarily zombies, but if there's some part of your personality, your consciousness that continues after you die. That's what parapsychologists are looking at as survival. But it doesn't just include ghosts and hauntings. It can also include, well, we said poltergeists, but they're not too sure that really proves survival, because even if you can affect things with your mind and release things subconsciously, it doesn't necessarily mean that whatever you're doing when you're alive is possible when you're dead.
Okay.
Now, one of the hypotheses some people say is that if things actually do move in a ghost or haunting situation, it could be the psychokinesis of whatever it is that you're seeing and what's going on there, or it could be you initiating it as well. So there's a little bit of gray area there, and there's actually some good papers that, at some point maybe we can talk about that kind of take a really hard look at, is there really such a difference between hauntings, apparitions, and poltergeists?
Okay.
There's some distinguishing facts, but now they're looking at some of them. And one of the ones I read recently was really interesting, that said that after somebody had a haunting experience, it almost seemed like there was lingering poltergeist activity.
That might be a good topic for a new show.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be an interesting one, because it's not so black and white as, even in the past, in one of our first books, we made a clear distinction. But I think there's a lot of information and data out there that might call that into question.
Well, it's been 12 years, maybe?
12 years since
our
the first,
first book, yeah.
Yeah, that one's going to hopefully get redone someday.
Time to do a new edition. I definitely think so.
Time to correct all the typos in that first one. Other areas of survival that parapsychologists study, out-of-body experiences, because they're assuming that if part of your consciousness can detach from your body when you're alive, and affect things or get people to see you, or they can run experiments, that's a good indication that something could potentially survive outside of your body after you die.
Okay.
And then the last one I'll mention for now is reincarnation. The idea that once you pass away, you come back again. And there's lots of books, and I think one of the really interesting things about reincarnation is that it's being studied by a lot of very serious scientists.
Well, that's good. I think it's necessary. There's a lot of different cultures out there that believe in reincarnation, and they will, stake their religion on it. So
Yep.
I think that's a really good, really excellent topic and area of study.
Yep, and it's the University of Virginia Medical School, the Division of Perceptual Studies. And you can take a look, and almost everything that they've published, certainly in the academic journals, are available for download for free off their website. So it's a really good place to go and get some information. The other one I didn't have on my piece of paper here as our notes to take us through this episode, but near-death experiences. That's another big area. And, one of the main researchers right now is Dr. Sam Parnia, doing the AWARE trial to try to get at a little more scientific study, prospective study, to see if people really can prove more or less that they were out of their body and they had this type of experience.
Yeah.
So it's all good stuff.
I enjoy those stories. They're very interesting and can't understand why it's happening. So the researchers I'm sure do, but the people every day, like myself, I'm just amazed by what they find.
Yeah, and a lot of people say it's due to lack of oxygen or too much carbon dioxide in the brain, or it's a compromised brain, and you might just be remembering things as you come out of that haze.
That's different information. That's new information that wasn't there before.
But they're again, Parney is trying to look at it prospectively, and there's actually one study out there that they looked at it, and they measured blood gas levels, and they measured brain activity, and just because an EEG, that's more on the surface layer. Just because you don't pick that up doesn't mean there's no brain activity. But, the one argument that Parnia and Bruce Grayson and others have always made that makes it questionable is if you have a compromised brain, especially during cardiac arrest, and most people don't have the functioning brain to make and retain a memory. So how is it that they're able to have these very vivid, life-changing experiences that have an impact down the road? How do you really explain that when you have a compromised brain that isn't functioning right, that shouldn't be able to really form any type of real thought or memory?
Well, there's another hypothesis out there that I'm not 1,000% aware of, but I do know some of it. And it's about that some people believe that it's outside the body. Your consciousness remains outside the body somewhere. And that it takes from that outside source, whether it be like a collective consciousness or its own area of, I don't know what.
It's almost like a TV receiving a signal. Your brain's more like the antenna in the TV that grabs the signal and decodes it and turns it into something meaningful.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's
pretty interesting.
That's, fascinating how they can even know that. But I could see why people would think that, because you don't have that knowledge inside yourself, and then when something happens, it comes from somewhere.
Yep. Yeah. And then they also make the argument, I guess, with the same way as, terminal lucidity. Which there's a paper that just came out. A bunch of scientists decided they're going to take a look at that now in the mainstream world, and they call it paradoxal lucidity. Okay, whatever. They did reference some of the parapsychology literature, which is interesting, but that's where people who have like Alzheimer's, dementia, have had strokes, have a lot of problems where they've kind of not been able to express themselves, not normal cognitive function, that shortly before death they become perfectly lucid and they can have a perfect conversation with you, and then they shortly pass, after that they pass away. So it's a whole nother area, which, I mean, that's one of the types of things they use to support that potential receiver, brain as a receiver hypothesis. So, I mean, there's always the mainstream medical and neuroscientific and psychological models and ideas of how these things happen. But if you start nitpicking them, it becomes pretty difficult to explain with some of those. So, okay, we've talked a lot about what parapsychology is. Let's talk about what it isn't.
Okay.
So I know we have a couple things here, and a lot of people think that anything paranormal is also part of parapsychology, but it's not.
No, it's not.
So you have a couple examples that you could give
I
us
guess,
that it's not,
witchcraft would be one.
right?
That whole, genre of witchcraft. Astrology. Fairies and goblins and all those, cute
Shrek.
little, yeah. Numerology, I would say maybe.
Yep.
Okay.
Tarot cards. Even though there's some but mainstream parapsychologists don't look at tarot cards as anything parapsychological.
Right. And I know there's a lot of people out there who do believe that these two are connected, but from what I have read and what I have learned from the parapsychological community is that UFOs are not part of that. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but
neither is Bigfoot.
Well, no, but people agree that, people think that because it's out there and it's unknown, it's paranormal. And that's fine if they want to think it's paranormal.
It is paranormal.
But it's not parapsychology.
It's not parapsychology.
Right.
That's a distinction, because I know there's people that call themselves parapsychologists that explore some of these areas and say that it's part of parapsychology, which it really isn't.
Yep.
So it's pretty interesting what is and what isn't. All right, demons, yes, no. Not part of parapsychology. It might be part of religion. It might be part of studying the paranormal. There's people that call themselves demonologists. We'll get into that another day. But demons are not part of what parapsychologists study.
Okay.
Now, somebody may have an experience that they interpret as demonic.
Yeah.
But if you talk to most parapsychologists, they don't study and they don't get involved with, and they don't even talk about demons or demonology.
Okay. Well, that's good information. Kind of distinguish the difference between.
There is a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Huge difference. So, what type of things do parapsychologists investigate, and what are they really looking for? There's really three main things that they study and they investigate and they research: is the authenticity, or is the phenomena real? Is there really something to be investigated? What are we looking at? The second thing is, once you can determine if it's real or not, you might even want to move on and look at the underlying process. What's causing these experiences? Why are people having these experiences? So you can actually do research as far as authenticity and underlying process at the same time. Now, there might be a underlying normal misinterpretation. You may, think you saw a ghost, but it may have been a flash of light from some headlights outside. There's all kinds of things that could be normal interpretations. But in parapsychology, they're open to both of those things. They're both open to both. Is it real? And how is this happening? What's the mechanism? So authenticity really addresses whether it's happening or not. And that's where you get the proof-oriented research, where you're trying to prove if there's actually a phenomena or actually an experience going on. And the process-oriented research is the how. How is it happening? And conventional psychological processes or operation of unknown factors. They don't know. So you can actually do proof or process-oriented research without doing the other one. So you don't have to have one before you can do the other, and a lot of parapsychologists do both.
Okay.
So then the third part of it is phenomenology, and this is really focusing on the description from the experience point of view.
Okay.
So it's a whole field of study where you look at it, and I study how you had that experience and what it meant to you and what happened to you. And it's almost like taking your information, your experience, and just picking it apart to see what happened. And what it really does is give you the characteristics of the phenomena as you experienced it and the impact it had on you. And why is this important? Because it can generate hypotheses for investigation in process-oriented or proof-oriented research.
Now, can that differ from person to person?
Absolutely. That's why you want to take a look at not just one person's story, an anecdote, which is a good argument. A lot of people share these things, and it's a story. It's an anecdote. But when you start doing big surveys like the Society for Psychical Research, where you get 17,000 people and they fill out questionnaires and you get thousands of them back, and you start looking at the characteristics, like people report, for example, a cold chill when they have an apparitional experience. Well, it's one of the reasons why many people try to measure room temperature during paranormal investigations or investigations of ghosts and haunts. And that's something we can talk about again at a later point, but we've never seen a drop in temperature.
Well, I was going to say maybe in our talk about maybe equipment, that would be good, because there's reasons why we don't get that and see that. So
Yep. But
we'll attempt to explain that at another time.
Another thing, like, for example, people say the hair on their arms or back of their neck stands up when they've had an experience. That's something else you could possibly measure.
Static electricity.
Absolutely. So the phenomenology of, these characteristics of what people experience give you things that you can actually go out and test. Somebody says, I saw the door open and a ghost walk through and the door closed. Well, it should be pretty easy to try to collect some data on that. Just put a camera on there and see what happens. So it gives
Motion sensors, different things like that.
Really good point. Motion sensors. Yep. Is there actually physically something there to detect or not? So it really establishes all the experiential features, all the characteristics. And in the parapsychology textbooks, they really say that this is what should set the research agenda.
Okay.
Because you look at the experiences, you find things you can test, you develop hypotheses, and you go out and test them. It really specifies the essential characteristics of the phenomena to be explained. So to me, it's one of the starting points. And while we all understand the limitations of personal experience and anecdotes, this is kind of where it has to start, though. And if you collect this information in a systematic way with a predetermined survey and questions, and you try to identify characteristics, then take it and try to test it, that's good. And I get sometimes where skeptics and cynics stop with saying it's an anecdote, you can't test it, and that's the end of it. That's a big problem, because those are kind of the start and where they should be forming the research agenda. So you shouldn't discount them. So I don't know. That's just kind of an overview of what parapsychologists do, what it isn't, kind of some of the ways, the main things they look at in research. And, I had a debate with somebody not too long ago, and it was on a Facebook page. This guy was anti-everything.
Okay.
Parapsychology, paranormal. And when I brought up that parapsychology is a legitimate science, yeah, right, whatever, take a hike, that definitely came up. So,
well, they wouldn't be using it in like the Virginia School of Perceptual Studies if wouldn't be a science if they weren't thinking it was. So
yeah, I mean, you can study anything,
right,
as long as you apply
just
certain methods,
scientific method
right.
to it.
So is parapsychology a science? So really, it's come a long way since the late 1800s. It's gone from collecting anecdotes and stories to actually experimental investigation in the lab setting. And even in the field setting, you can do good science in the field as well. They've established experimental methods, they have technical precision. And the one thing that I think holds it back a little bit is science is a social endeavor as well.
Well, it has to be kind of.
Right, because there's people involved.
Right.
So I guess, how do you determine if parapsychology or anything is a science?
I guess you got to keep trying and doing new things and trying to figure out what it is or what it isn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the way everything happens, right?
Yep.
Through study.
Yep. And actually looking at the Introduction to Parapsychology, the 5th edition, by Irwin and Watt, they come up with 10 things that they talk about to say, determining if a field is science. And parapsychology actually fills all 10 of these.
Nice.
So the first one is where the research is carried out at recognized universities and labs. It does. It happens.
Most part?
Yep, for the most part. For the most part. But there are actual universities that have parapsychology departments, parapsychologists. Most of them are trained as psychologists, but their study and thesis or doctoral dissertation was in parapsychology. But they do carry it out at recognized universities and labs. We already talked, and you just mentioned it again, at the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. You don't get much higher than an MD and a PhD. People have, some of those people have both degrees.
Yeah.
Professionalism versus amateurs. This is number 2. The one thing that's sometimes can hurt parapsychology with the interest in the paranormal is orthodox scientists, when they see amateurs in the field, they see the field more as a craft or a hobby rather than science.
Why is it particularly them? Is it their background, or?
It's amateurs that orthodox scientists look at it and say, you don't have formal training, you aren't implying scientific method, you're not critically evaluating things, you're not publishing, there's no peer review. And for all these 10 things I'm going to list, they say amateurs overall don't do that.
I can see that.
But amateurs in the past have made huge contributions to parapsychology.
But I guess it's very limited to, what they do and how they collect their data and all that stuff, and how they perform what they do.
Right. And in this day and age, the hot new thing is citizen science, where scientists can train normal people and citizens to help collect data, and then the scientists can evaluate it and do what they can with it. And with the limited funding and the number of researchers in the parapsychological field, amateurs could have a real role to play if they did it the right way and they were trained appropriately.
Well, you do the same thing, very, very common for you, because you explain statistics to people who are not aware of it and how to apply it to a lot of things that they're, the data that they're collecting through their investigations and stuff like that. So, I think that's good. I think people should be passing along information that can help, everyone, and do it in a way that it's a community effort to, help to raise the bar in the ghost hunting and paranormal investigation field, because I think it's very much necessary. I really do. It's getting to be, it feels like the same old constantly. We've been doing this for over 20 years. Legitimately doing this for 20 years. We can prove it.
Yep.
Still, it's very much feels like the same thing. Even when a new group gets going, it's the same things over and over and over, and no one wants to learn anything new, and they just keep doing it. And it's like, come on, let's teach you how to
step it up a little.
Certain things. Let's learn new topics, new areas to look into, new whatever.
And there's a lot of opportunity. There's free classes online. You can do the ParaMOOC, which is the massive online class that's put on once every year or so. It might be a little more frequent now, but that's a great.
Free, right?
That's free, absolutely free. And they have leading researchers, leading psychologists, parapsychologists. They have skeptics. They have anomalistic psychologists, and they have just a whole ton of great information. And they cover. I think they're focusing more on covering different topics now. And I've taken the class 3 times because they do cover different things, and it's free. But you can also, University of Edinburgh, they have a online class taught by Dr. Carolyn Watt from the Coaster Parapsychology unit, and you can take her class. It's I think it's 12 weeks, and it's like a normal college class. It's good information.
From what I hear from you, though, it's very intense, so you've got to be on top of it and learn and want to learn and stay on top of it.
It's a college-level class, but it's great information.
It is great. It is great. And she's very interactive from what you've told me.
Yep, she lectures. You can email with her back and forth at times to talk to her over, the internet, Skype session. So she's great. All right, moving on. So the third thing that determines if a field of study is science is professional societies, having your own professional societies. And of course, parapsychology has that in the Parapsychological Association, which was formed in 1957. Number 4, there's got to be guidelines for ethics of experimentation in the field. So you got to have a way of basically saying this is what you should and shouldn't do. These are the rules you have to follow. This is ethically how you conduct research. That is just standard across any scientific field. And and the Parapsychological Association did that in 1977.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's true.
I think I was 6 years old then.
Yeah, and you've been
How old were
studying
you?
it. Oh, don't even start.
Oh,
We all know I'm older than you.
okay. We'll address that in a different show. Okay, so number 5, there has to be an affiliation with other scientific associations. So it kind of gives you a voice to form and promote science policy. The Parapsychological Association joined the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1969, which is a very large, respectable group of scientists and different associations. Number 6, research should be conducted internationally. And parapsychological research, I don't know if many people know this, it's conducted in 30 different countries.
Really?
To this day.
Wow.
There's still 30 different countries where it's conducted.
That's fantastic, because that's saying that everybody around the world believes that there has to be something other than just anecdotal stories and stuff like that. It's across the world.
They at least think there's something worth studying
and
doing it on an academic level. Number 7, publications of specialist journals. There's the Journal of Parapsychology, the European Journal of Parapsychology, the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Theta, and the Journal of Near-Death Studies, just to mention a few of them. There's some other ones out there as well.
Yeah, you can find a bunch of them on our website as well.
Yeah, we do link a lot of those, and those links will take you there. And some of them, they have free articles every once in a while. Other ones, it's pay to become part of the journal or the association. But it's definitely worth it. Going along with that, I'm going to go out of order a little bit here. But the next one would be publication then in other mainstream journals, not just your specialist little journals. And parapsychological articles have been published in the Psychological Bulletin, the British Journal of Psychology, as well as the American Psychologist.
So actually, psychology and psychologists believe that there is something more to it, at least to a certain level, where they're willing to look at it and...
they believe there's experiences.
Right.
They might not believe that they're
paranormal
or supernatural in nature.
I think a lot of those psychologists actually turn into parapsychologists once they start, learning more about what they're dealing with and that kind of thing. And some of them
some do when they look at the data. But there's also been, and I'm going to be devil's advocate here, that there's some parapsychologists that turned into skeptics.
Okay.
And cynics, where
that's good.
They've looked at the data and said, I don't think there's anything going on, but there's many others that have gone the other way. They look at it and go, oh, there is something to all this. So
it's going to be both.
The jury's still out.
Well, yeah. You're always going to have both.
Yep. So the last two is it has to be a self-policing field. So if somebody breaks the rules, they kind of get blackballed and they get kicked out of the field. And that's happened.
Oh, I know people who do that.
Yeah, and there was actually a researcher that they found was kind of fudging data and wasn't doing things quite ethically, and they did basically remove them from the journals and publication and their university positions. So,
yeah, I've heard of that happening a lot.
Yep.
Well, not a lot, but enough
it does happen.
Enough to make you think about it, yeah.
And then, of course, the last one is that this type of thing needs to be established in a university setting, so you can train students how to properly research and add to the information base of the field.
Right.
So a couple other things here as we're coming up on a half-hour mark.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Surveys. So there's been some surveys asking scientists what do they think about parapsychology and psi phenomena. And most scientists do not overall accept that psi, the existence of psi phenomena. They don't accept the data right now as proving that it's actually there. However, most of them believe that parapsychological hypotheses should be evaluated in a conventional scientific manner. So they support the research of it.
Right. They just aren't certain that it is what they say it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, a lot of scientists, even in normal mainstream areas, when they find something or discover something new, they still are hesitant to say for sure with 100% certainty.
Right. But it's okay. It takes time to, to create the data, whatever you want to call it, that it takes to, to get these proper investigations done and stuff like that. And I got to say, the community these days aren't giving us much to work with.
But we got to differentiate the community of ghost hunters, paranormal investigators versus academic parapsychology. Huge
absolutely
difference.
I agree, and I think I was probably thinking of the paranormal community more than the other, but I think there's room for others to do this and to grow and to learn and to create that wonderful data that we're looking for. Well, not create it, but
generate data,
generate it. Yes,
collect it,
and for us to go further into the field with it. So.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, and that's important because they're going to have to get people involved because funding, the total human and financial resources, again, this is out of Introduction to Parapsychology, 5th edition, total human and financial resources devoted from 1882 to 2007 is equal to the psychological research for a mere 2 months.
Holy cow.
So
that's a lot.
Not a lot of money and people effort going into it.
Right. I mean, that's a...
that's not a lot at all.
Well, yeah.
So one of the other things people have said is effect sizes. It's basically how big of an effect you see in an experiment.
Right. And those are harder to find sometimes.
They are, but the parapsychology effect sizes are very similar to other studies in mainstream psychology.
But they're not accepting the ones
That's the money question. I've heard a lot of people ask that question to parapsychologists, why don't people accept this? I mean, Jessica Utz is a statistician out of California, affiliated with the Statistical Society of America, and she's done a lot with looking at psi or parapsychology data. And she said by any other measure or standard in any other field, this data would be accepted as there is a real effect.
Wow.
So there's still a stigma against the field.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Final little note here is replication. A lot of people say there isn't a lot of replication in parapsychology. Well, that's true, but there's a lot of effort. And the other thing you need to consider is that journals overall don't like to publish replications. If you just say, hey, I prove what he said 2 years ago, let's publish it, they're like,
But you
we're
can't
kind of looking for
piggyback
something new.
Can't piggyback on anybody else?
You actually see more replication. We see more replication in parapsychology than you do in other areas. So there's actually a replication crisis in the social sciences. It's also seen in medical science where sometimes they can't reproduce certain results that they said they got. So It's not just a parapsychology thing. It's also happening in mainstream science. So I think the bottom line is, to kind of start wrapping this up, there's no question, there's no dispute that people have experiences. And to investigate these experiences using science is the way to go. I mean, there is scientific investigation. There's a way to do that, and if you use a scientific method and you investigate it a certain way, this, by definition, is science. That's what you're supposed to do, investigate these things.
Right.
So I guess the last thing to talk about is, where would you go to find more information?
Probably the Parapsychological Association. That would probably be the first place I'd start.
Okay.
Maybe the
The Parapsychology Foundation.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Yeah.
The Society for Psychical Research would be another really good one.
Right.
And the American Society for Psychical Research, that's another really good one.
We already talked about the University of Edinburgh. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a website called Public Parapsychology. A lot of good information there. The Ryan Research Institute, that used to be associated and affiliated with Duke University, to me, it kind of changed a little bit, but they're trying to make a comeback now with getting back into more mainstream academic parapsychology. We already talked about the University of Virginia Medical School Division of Perceptual Studies. And then there's 2 parapsychology textbooks that we own. The one is Parapsychology, a Handbook for the 21st Century, and an Introduction to Parapsychology, the 5th edition. And just so you know, I believe you can get Google Books. You can get those, like the electronic version, for $15 each, and then you
Nice.
have it, and you can reference it and read it anytime you want. So,
Wow.
anyway, that is a whirlwind introduction to parapsychology.
Yeah, and done in such a nice, tight-knit time frame.
Only 40 minutes of babbling to get through that.
Well.
So anyway, but we thank everybody for listening again. And Jen, why don't you let them know where they can find us and reach us, and if they have topics and stuff, how do you get a hold of us and tell us?
Sure. Well, because you're listening to us, you can find us at sidechat.buzzsprout.com or at sidechat@yahoo.com.
That's our email. You can email us. That's where you'd
yes.
find us to get us some emails.
Also, we are on Facebook at ESPSI Center, SB Center. And we can also be found at paranormalresearchgroup.com or Paranormal Research Group on Facebook.
Yep. So a couple ways to reach us, so feel free to leave comments. Tell us what you like, what you don't like about the show, if you have topics, if you have suggestions, or just questions that you would like us to talk about. So I think that's it, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back shortly. All right, take care.